Good morning and welcome to the Esri Security and Resilience webinar series. Our title today is Site Security, Applying Security Principles to a Self-Contained Environment. For a little context to that title, what do we mean by a self-contained environment? Think facility. That could mean anything from a campus environment, K through 12, university, casino, military base, stadium, or really anything similar to those types of facilities. And the topic here really is special because the solutions or the configurable workflows that we're going to show today are really applicable to a lot of different types of agencies and organizations, public and private, whether you're military, federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, or even corporate security. And we think that's reflective of how we at Esri really now treat our security practice as a horizontal. It includes many organizations and agencies, not just traditional .gov law enforcement. If you are from any of those entities, so simply think of sites, assets, and facilities that you're tasked with protecting, and you should find the examples that we're going to show quite applicable to your specific situation. Our team today, my name is Carl Walter, and I'm the Director of Homeland Security Solutions here at Esri, and I'll be facilitating our webinar today. And I'm being joined by Chris Delaney, and Chris is one of our Senior Solution Engineers here on the Esri Public Safety team. The presentation workflow will involve me highlighting what we call site security requirements, and Chris will walk us through some of the technical pieces. And Chris also is the individual that configured many of these applications, so he's definitely the right guy to be walking us through the technical aspects. The webinar today will have the look and feel of a case study. It's going to be 100% real, and our topic is going to be how we, at Esri, leverage the ArcGIS platform as a facility security tool to secure the 2020 Esri Federal GIS Conference, which was recently held this past February in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Convention Center. And why did we choose this example? Just from a logistics standpoint and our ability to do it easily, it was our event, and we are allowed to talk about it. Oftentimes, some of the folks like you that we do these things for, we're not really able to talk about it and explain. So because it was our event, we thought it was a good idea. However, from a threat standpoint, there were about 5,000 people in a very small contained area. Hundreds of those people were very senior government officials, including the director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So we had some very high-level folks there. And then from Esri, from our company's standpoint, we had our entire leadership team there, again, all in one small contained area. And in addition to hundreds of our employees who actually worked the event. Additionally, from a threat standpoint, the event was in downtown Washington, D.C. So geographically, we were in close proximity to many secure, sensitive locations, the White House, other government buildings. We were also sharing the D.C. Convention Center that week with another very large event and high security event. The National Governors Association meeting was there. So every governor in the country and their security detail was also on site for their event. Again, we were sharing the same facility. I'm going to go through a chronology, kind of an A through Z of our security strategy and briefly explain the tools and workflows. And then Chris is going to follow up with the technical demonstrations. I'm going to sort of summarize the entire workflow before we get into the technical demonstrations, because we are going to be showing you a lot of it quickly. It's going to include the pre-planning security components all the way through the execution of the event. The first thing that we did is we wanted to understand threats around the facility. And what I asked Chris from a requirements standpoint was to find a lightweight tool, in this case, Insights, and to bring in some open source threat data. The next piece of our pre-event process was to do a tactical site survey, a walkthrough, and we did that using Collector, where we had field security teams walk through the venue and identify points of interest to security. It could have been the location of an elevator, could have been an ingress-egress, or the location of where chemicals or hazardous materials were stored. We'll show you how we did that. From an operational pre-plan, we used Web App Builder and the Tactical Operations Planter to integrate our facility security director's operations plan, essentially the location of private security guards in the venue. We did a couple other things where we integrated the event plan from AutoCAD of the different locations on our expo floor of where the different booths were and the different government agencies had booths. We needed to be able to dispatch our mobile field security force, and to do that, we used Workforce. We also wanted to just passively monitor and track our about 30 private security guards, and we did that using Tracker. So the purpose of that was to understand the real-time location of our security staff and overlaid with the locations from the ops plan of where the guards were actually supposed to be. And then we needed one view, one single pane of glass to manage multiple sources of information in a way that a low-level person could understand it as well as a senior executive. And we did that using Operations Dashboard. This piece is probably the most complex part of our presentation because there's probably about 10 different sources of information coming in that we're going to walk you through. While we were focused locally at a micro level, we were also monitoring our global assets. We have buildings and assets and people and distributors in countries throughout the world, and we also were monitoring potential threats around those facilities. Not every threat, just threats around geofenced locations. We had the ability to do rapid hazard analysis using our bomb blast and ERG tools. Whether it was a simulation or whether it was an actual threat, we could, in a matter of seconds, run a quick simulation to understand a evacuation zone and a shelter-in-place zone. And then we wanted to enable our mobile field force, and we did that using Survey 123. And our security guards could actually take a photo and fill out a small form if they witnessed something of a suspicious nature in the venue site or around the venue site. And that helped us with our command control, being able to communicate back and forth. And then much of the demo is going to be in 2D, but we're also going to show how everything that we do in 2D can also be represented in 3D. And as the technology advances rapidly, it's getting easier to collect, easier to work with, and less expensive. So we'll have a couple examples there. And then finally, everything, the workflows that Chris is going to walk us through, please understand that none of this is custom. It was all configurable, and it was built in a matter of hours, days, rather than weeks, months, years. So it's a very, very quick deployment capability, as well as the ability to change things on the fly. We're going to show you, again, A through Z, the chronology of this event, threat assessment, all the way through dispatch, and then through 3D. And I'm going to turn the screen and the monitor over to Chris Delaney, and we're going to start walking through exactly what this looked like within the ArcGIS platform. The first thing from a requirements standpoint that I tasked Chris with and that he configured was, we've got our location in downtown Washington, D.C. Esri is not a law enforcement information. We don't have access to sensitive law enforcement data. Find me a lightweight business information tool and find some open source threat feeds that we can understand problems around the convention center itself. So Chris, walk us through how we did that.
Sure, Carl, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone on the webinar. Thanks for joining us. So as per Carl's instruction, to support the planning workflows of our Director of Security for our Fed GIS event in Washington, D.C., I was acting in a role as an intelligence analyst, where I need to be able to, as Carl mentioned, find a way to pull in some local law enforcement data to understand threats that might potentially impact or have security implications for how we might plan our operational strategy for this event. And so those Intel analysts are not generally folks who are going to be GIS professionals. They need a lightweight tool to be able to do this work. So Insights for ArcGIS really represents kind of the ideal solution for that kind of capability, where I can simply drag and drop data that I might procure from some law enforcement agency. Fortunately, in this particular example, we were in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. already leverages Esri and provides a wide array of open source data feeds that can be brought immediately into Insights for ArcGIS. So using the ability to create quick, easy drag and drop data visualizations of maps, charts, and tables, I was able to create a variety of data visualizations to support a understanding of the threat environment in and around the DC Convention Center. So what you're looking at here is 2019 violent crime. I can see colored cells that represent concentration from light to dark in terms of the number of incidents. As I zoom in further, I can see particular concentrations of problem areas. And then as I zoom even further into the area around the convention center, I can see the individual incidents themselves. If I'm interested in understanding particular patterns of crime, I can filter by specific types of incidents. So for example, I can filter for robberies, and now I can start to understand the spatial patterns of robberies in and around that area. I can also see a chart that helps me see when those robberies are occurring. Our event was in February, which happens to be the lowest volume month last year. I can see all of the citywide robberies that happened in around the convention center. I can also see a breakdown in this hour of day and day of week chart of when those robberies are occurring to determine whether or not they have implications for the attendees who will be participating in this event at the convention center. I've done this for a variety of other sources as well. So in addition to violent crime, we have tabs that represent visualizations of Washington, D.C.'s gunshot detection system using ShotSpotter, acoustic technology for understanding where gunshots are occurring. And so we've done the same thing here, being able to understand clusters of activity for ShotSpotter activations and when they are occurring. Or being able to zoom in and understand exactly where there are sex offenders that are living or working in and around the convention center that we might want to be aware of as we have attendees coming to these locations. And then lastly, current conditions. So being able to pull in a live feed of current conditions of crime in and around the convention center so we can understand issues that might be happening in the immediate time frame leading up to the event itself. So in this way, we're able to provide our director of security a full picture of a threat assessment, whether that is coming from openly available threat feeds, as was the case in this instance, or if that information was requested from a state, local, or federal entity, and that information was provided by spreadsheet, I could also take that data as a spreadsheet, bring it in, render it as points on a map on the fly, and perform this kind of analysis, and then deliver it in the form of these kind of nicely configured pages so that our director of security can understand the threat environment in and around the convention center and incorporate that into their plans for building out an operational plan for the event.
All right, our next piece is the operational planning component, and there's a couple scenarios here. As I talked earlier, we had the pre-plan that was provided to us, the static guard locations. We had the tactical site survey of where we did a pre-event walkthrough, and then we also had, you can see in the yellow, the event planning team, the location of where all the different expo booths are on the floor, in case I mean, we needed that visual if we had to dispatch somebody into the middle of a massive event floor. Chris, there's a couple different pieces there. Walk us through how you did that.
Sure. So there's a couple of things, a couple of different layers here that come into providing a complete visualization of the actual operational plan itself. And so the very first part is, understanding the layout of the facility. And in this case, the FedGIS occurs at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. And this is entirely an inside event. So we need to be able to understand what the interior floor plans are going to look like, not only from the perspective of the layout of the convention center itself, but also from the perspective of any of the booths that we're going to be setting up in our expo area. Generally, our events staff is going to be planning that work using a computer-aided design tool like Autodesk. Fortunately, Autodesk and Esri have recently come together so that CAD drawings that are created in Autodesk and that are available as a Revit file can be taken and turned into GIS layers that can be then overlaid for these kinds of planning purposes in a web-based desktop GIS or web-based or desktop GIS. And that's what we've done here. We've brought in both the outline of all of the buildings for the convention center and our individual booths for our expo hall that were originally designed in CAD. Now they're available as GIS layers to help contextualize the operational plan that we'll have to build. So on top of that, we're going to be adding in a variety of different layers. Information on special event areas or physical assets, so things like fire extinguishers or AED units or first aid stations that we're going to set up. We're also going to wrap in things like operational zones or resource assignments, things like foot posts that we're going to have our private security teams responsible for. So we can build all of this stuff initially, and we have the ability to organize it by level. So this is a multi-level building, so we can then apply some filtering tools that enable us to see kind of what we have staffed at various levels in the building. And this helps us understand kind of who's going to be where. And then for our director of security, we wanted to be able to provide a tool that enables him to build out the rest of his operational plan in, as Carl mentioned, two ways. First, from his desk, well in advance of the event, where he is going to start to plan out prospective locations where he's going to have badge checks or foot posts, all of that kind of stuff, where he's going to put the command post. And with some simple web editing tools, he has access to all of the layers that are in this particular set of map. And so he can do things like say, okay, I'm going to be placing I'm going to just kind of marking where I've got surveillance systems. So I'm going to click on the surveillance system icon, and I'm going to place a location where I know I have one of my cameras. I can add in additional information, and then it's ready to go. So in this way, he can do some initial pre-planning that gets him ready for setting up what he envisions is the operational plan in this event. But then as Carl mentioned, we also have a need to be able to validate that information once you get on site leading up to the event. And to do that, we can enable this same kind of editing capability, but from a mobile device. So what you're seeing right now on the left-hand side of the screen is my mobile device. It's an iPhone. And using the Collector app, we are enabling the Director of Security to go into that app, and as they log in, they can now, when they're on site, see the same map that's available in the web app, but now in a mobile application. So as they're moving around, they're at a particular location, they can add some additional information. This is where we're going to place an AED unit. We can add that information, capture some additional information about that, and then add that information to our map, and then it's reflected in real time in any of the different apps that are utilizing these sets of layers. So in that way, he can validate his original operational plan, and he's got the ability to go in and create more data as is necessary on the fly to be able to create a complete operational plan that's ready to use as the Director of Security moves from the planning phase of the event into the operational phase of the event. But there are a couple of other capabilities that might be relevant to that Director of Security before the event occurs. and that we've built into our web app application as well. So in addition to building out the plan, the director of security might need to be prepared for contemplating where evacuations need to occur in the event of some kind of major incident. So in the event that we did need to evacuate the thousands of folks that are attending this event, where can we evacuate them to safely from the convention center? To help out with those kinds of questions, we have a crowd estimation tool that's been built into this web mapping application as well. Using that crowd estimation tool, I can simply click on this polygon, and then I can evaluate a particular area. In this example, if I change my base map and I switch it to some imagery, I can see that there's a large square right in front of the right in front of the convention center, Mount Vernon Square. I can use our crowd estimates editing tool to draw a polygon around the extent of this park. And then using a common method for crowd estimation called the Jacobs method, it's going to provide me a label that describes how many people I could reasonably expect to fit into this park based on a low density of people, a medium density of people, and a high density of people. And so in this case, I can fit anywhere from 22,700 all the way up to 90,000 people within this park. So I know that I have a satisfactory area from which to evacuate my my attendees of this event should I need to in the event of an emergency.
Now, Chris, a couple other requirements that came through for us here was the ability to do some consequence assessment and some rapid hazard analysis. There's a couple tools up on your bar in the top right-hand corner to simulate different types of IEDs, a truck bomb all the way down to a suitcase. Could you walk through either the bomb blast or the ERG tool and help us understand the consequences of if that were to occur?
Sure. So this particular app, which is a configuration of Esri's web app builder product, comes with it about 50 different widgets that enable you to perform a variety of different functions. The first widget that I've shown so far is our editing widget, so that any of the editable layers that are in a map can be modified from a browser. But in addition, we have a bunch of mission-focused apps as well. And so as Carl mentioned, several of those mission-focused apps are oriented specifically to public safety missions. And an example of one of those is our threat analysis widget. This widget is based on the JCAT counterterrorism guide for bomb blast distances, so shelter-in-place zones and mandatory evacuation distances for any kind of bomb blast that would occur in a critical threat environment. So to use that particular tool, I can simply select a point on a map where I have a suspicious package, select that location, and I can pick the type of threat based on the JCAT standards. And so maybe in this case, it's a briefcase. That's going to give me a mandatory evacuation distance of 150 feet and a safe evacuation distance of 1,850 feet. From there, I can press create zones, and that's going to enable me to create a mandatory evacuation distance area and a safe evacuation distance. I can also, from here, push this data then into any number of other ArcGIS apps, so dashboards or mobile applications that security teams would need to be able to better position themselves to support this empirically based evacuation set of distances instead of having to do that through guesswork. A second example of some of the planning capabilities that are available in the widgets that are in Web App Builder are our emergency response guide widget. So this is particularly helpful for scenarios where you've had some kind of chemical spill and you need to be able to establish a protective area, perform some initial evacuations, and you want to do that in a way that does not put your first responders at risk and successfully evacuates everyone. So in this case, I can also, again, click a point on the map to establish a spill location. I can start to type in a particular type of material that I believe this spill to be related to. So an example would be anhydrous ammonia. There it is, the third option. If I click on this little PDF icon, it's going to pull up for me the exact page in the emergency response guide that lists the protective actions that need to be taken. And then as I select this, I have some additional parameters that I can configure: size of the spill, the wind direction, the time of the spill. And then what it will create for me is not only my initial isolation zone, a protective action zone, and a downwind zone that I now can kind of base my response off of these empirical estimations of the impacted area based on the nature of the chemical to ensure that my first responders are taking action in a safe way, and we're getting people out of there, the appropriate people that are out of there relative to the area of impact.
And then, Chris, we can take a quick pause here. I'll remind the audience that you have the ability to submit questions to us, which we will answer on the fly or at the end. And Chris, we had one question that came in, and I'll summarize it here. The requester is asking for a rough idea of how long it took to build the ops planning application that you just demonstrated here.
Yeah, so everything that you've seen in terms of the widgets are capabilities that are just out of the box. The layers, by and large, were taken from our forthcoming special events solution that should be released in July. So the set of capabilities largely are there, ready to use. So this was something that took me as a Esri solution engineer about 3 hours to build. For someone who is a kind of more of a regular user, it would take about a half a day to a day to configure the sets of capabilities. Again, it's not complicated to build this out. It's fairly straightforward, and you're leveraging a lot of tools and capabilities and layer templates that already exist in the ArcGIS platform.
All configurable, all out of the box, nothing custom. All right, that kind of ends our pre-operational piece, and we're going to now go into the discussion of when our event went live. I mentioned that we were monitoring, that we employed 30 to 40 private security guards to help us secure this event, and the requirement that I gave to Chris was, you know, at 6 a.m. each morning, we're going to have a handful of people walk in. I need to be able to check them in and check them out and get them to their posts, as well as track where they are. And Chris, if you can walk us through the solution that you chose to do that with, please.
Sure. So Carl's requirement for management of security during the event was that for all of our on-site security personnel, so these are a private security company that Esri hires to support security for the convention center during the event, those security personnel were to be enabled with 3 main capabilities via mobile devices. So to do that, we provisioned them with mobile devices, Sonim ruggedized mobile devices. They were Android devices from AT&T, and we provided 3 ArcGIS apps for them. First, Tracker for ArcGIS to enable real-time tracking of all of the security personnel so that we would know where everyone was at any given time. Secondly, Workforce for ArcGIS so that we could dispatch incidents out to our security teams for response. And thirdly, Survey 123 for ArcGIS that would enable our security personnel to capture from the field any kind of suspicious incident that they wanted to relay back to our security operations center, to our director of security, so that we could take appropriate action and follow up. Now, as Carl mentioned, the challenge that we had is that all of those security personnel did not have their own devices. We were going to provision those devices every single day to the personnel that showed up for that particular shift. So every single shift, we were checking out mobile devices to each of the security personnel, and then at the conclusion of their shift, they would come back to the security operations center and they would check back in the device so that we could re-provision it to the next shift. So to do that, we used a configuration of one of Esri's configurable apps called Crowdsource Manager. this app lets us see a table of all of our personnel. And so what you see here under user ID is all of the unique IDs that have been created with each of the different phones that we're provisioning out to all of our security staff. And as a particular person, a security personnel individual would come in to check in for the day, we would provide them a phone. So in this case, we would provide Latanya Fed Tracker 15. That was the unique ID of the phone, and it had that particular phone number. And as we would check them in, we'd indicate that, okay, she is now working, and we would pick the location, the foot post that she was going to be responsible for from a list of preset posts. And then we would save that information. And now she could go out into the field with a ready-to-use phone that had been preset for her with all of those capabilities: real-time tracking, the ability to receive assignments for follow-up, and the ability to report suspicious incidents back to our security operations center. So that was the way in which we logistically managed the provisioning of mobile devices out to these security staff on a shift-by-shift basis to be able to kind of act as, you know, sensors for our complete security operation of managing the event.
So we have another question that came in, Chris, that I'll take a first crack at, and you can probably add anything that I missed. The question is, were the devices bring your own devices, or did Esri provide the devices? Our strategy here was we identified a partner that was willing to work with us and pilot their devices, and we worked with Sprint. And Sprint was the company that provided us with about 40 phones that we provided to the Guard Force. And our objective there was we made a very early decision. We did not want to deal with bring your own devices. We wanted to completely own and control the hardware, the mobile smartphone, and load it, make sure it was charged, make sure everything was up to date. So we had our go bag of 30 plus phones that we owned, that we managed, and we could have distributed those to anybody, local, state, federal, private, and we didn't have to worry about networks and, you know, people dealing with, you know, inferior devices. Chris, did I miss anything there that you would add, or was that pretty much answering the question?
Yep, no, I think you covered it, Carl. Thank you.
All right, the next piece here is we've got a ton of information that we need to manage at a high level, but we also need to be able to continue to interrogate the data and understand the data. And Chris, walk us through, we've got a ton of sources of information in here. Walk us through how we did this using Operations Dashboard, and maybe explain each one of these different information sources and how we leveraged each of those independently and together.
Sure. So you know, now we're moving from the kind of getting ready for the event to managing the event in real time. And so what you're seeing now is a configuration of Esri's Operations Dashboard app. And what we've tried to do with this app is to be able to, as Carl alluded to, handle the ability for the Director of Security within the Security Operations Center to visualize and interrogate a wide array of different sources that might be relevant towards his or her need to be able to manage and coordinate security operations for this event. But we have to do that in a way that prioritizes the most important information first. And so to support those needs, we've built this dashboard, and the dashboard has kind of a passive view that was what you're seeing right now that would reflect kind of what is up on the video wall at all times in the Security Operations Center. And there is some additional tab data that's available for a user to interrogate to ask additional questions. So let's start by looking at what is in this passive view. So what we can see along the right-hand side of this passive view is all of the individual locations where any of our security team members or our Esri staff are currently, they're using our tracker for ArcGIS on their mobile devices to have their exact locations tracked. So I can click on any one of these and I can see where that person is. You can also see a label that indicates their name and the level of the building that they are currently on. So this whole right-hand side lets me see all of our the real-time positions of all of our currently working staff. That helps me know where any particular person is, if they are where they're supposed to be relative to assigned foot posts, and just generally enables me to have that situational awareness for my personnel. On the left-hand side of the dashboard, I can see any of the incidents that are occurring. So you can see a list of things like medical assistance or suspicious packages or disturbances. These are all notional. We didn't have this many incidents occur at our conference, thankfully. But this is a kind of, the live list of things that the director of security or the SOC operators need to be aware of that are coming in as potential threats for the director of security to be able to address. So how do those threats get into this dashboard? And so this information is coming in real time. The way that that information is coming in is through the ArcGIS platform in two ways. First and foremost, we have the ability to dispatch information out to our security teams from the operations post. So let's say the SOC gets a call that there's a suspicious package that's been observed, or an individual in need of medical assistance. Using Workforce for ArcGIS, we have a web-based tool for lightweight creation of incidents and for dispatching those incidents. So again, here we can see all of our staff, and we can see a live list of all of our assignments. If I receive that information via radio or via phone, I can come into Workforce, I can create a new assignment type. It's a medical assistance call. It's going to be right here on the front steps of the convention center. And I'm going to assign it to Chris Delaney. And I'm going to add a brief little description. Individual fell and hurt themselves badly, bleeding, possible broken leg. And now I can create that assignment. Once that assignment is created, it is now available not only in our dashboard, where that information is going to show up in our dashboard. So it'll show up in just a moment here for us to see, but it'll also show up on our mobile devices. So one of my field staff who's out in the field are going to be able to get that information. So here I am the field worker. I've now been able to see that information come in real time. I can view this new assignment that has been set up for me, and I can indicate that I am starting to work on that particular assignment. And that information is going to be reflected in both our dashboard and in the mobile device and back on our dispatching app, so that we're able to track that information in real time. So that's one of the ways in which we're able to capture information on our, and there it is in our dashboard. We can see that event right there. We can coordinate between capturing information from our SOC and being able to dispatch that information out to our teams. But there is an additional way in which these kinds of incidents can be reported, and that is through Survey 123. So again, going back to the view of my security personnel, if they saw some kind of situation that was of concern, they could report that directly to our Security Operations Center using Survey 123, where they have a suspicious activity report that they can complete. They can come into this report, they can collect a new form, select the report type, which is a suspicious package. They can then use Siri to dictate some description information. Unattended backpack left at location, looks military in style. From there, they can grab where that location is. They can pick a picture and then they can send that information in real time to the command post for follow-up. So as I move back from my visualization of the phone to the dashboard, in just a moment, we'll see a new activity report pop up for that particular suspicious laptop, and we'll be able to take action on it. So this is an example of that kind of capability where we're able to see these kind of real-time relationships between all of our security personnel out in the field who are capturing information and being able to coordinate that information with all of our our operators in the Security Operations Center. But then in addition to that, we've also brought in some additional threat information that could be relevant to the operations of our event. And in particular, as I zoom out here from our event towards the larger Washington, D.C. area, we can see that there is, if I click on a second tab here on the left-hand side, there are alerts in and around the greater DC area. So these are alerts that we have set up to trigger using one of our server products called GeoEvent Server. And the idea with this these particular set of alerts is we are in real time querying an API from a variety of social media analytic providers such as Factal or Data to be able to trigger alerts anytime any of a number of different kind of incidents that hit certain keywords and are within a 2-mile radius of our location, that they pop up as alerts into our dashboard in another tab. So here we can see a number of different types of alerts from Factal or from Data related to various types of categories of concern. So we've put a bunch on here just so that this example can be shown, but whatever the kind of focus areas of your event, your kind of purpose was, whether it was civil unrest, whether it was crime or disorder, politics or infrastructure issues, those alerts could be triggered to be able to provide additional threat context to your dashboard. And so from here, not only can you see the local kinds of threats that were occurring, but you also have the ability to visualize some other contexts of that data as well. So things like we can visualize all of our specific post locations, where they are currently active, or things like current traffic conditions. So maybe we've had one of these suspicious packages where it's outside in and around the convention center, and we want to be able to visualize cameras that are in the immediate area. And so here what we've done is bring in some traffic cameras using the Traffic Land API, but this could come just as easily from any camera system that you have available, where you can consume the camera feed via a URL. And we've also brought in, to provide that situational context around our location, some traffic alerting data, traffic conditions data from Waze. So what you can see here in the map are these different yellow to red colored lines that represents the thickness and density of the traffic in those areas. So those are areas that are currently experiencing some kind of traffic jam, and specific alerts. So we've had a traffic jam up here on New Jersey Ave Northwest, or over here where we've had a hazard on the road, there's a car stopped. And this is live information. So you can see right here, this is today as of 12:39 p.m. Eastern time. So again, this just provides us additional situational awareness to the world that's happening around where our event is. It provides us a larger security context to our event. Likewise, in the event that we had incidents that were going to impact transit-related issues, we've also been able to integrate to public data feeds that Washington, D.C. has available on their live tracking of all of the metro trains as well as the active buses. So what you can see in this particular example are all of the live positions in real time of any buses that are active in and around the convention center, also active trains in and around the convention center. The buses and the trains, the orientation of the icon represents the direction of travel for that particular train, and whether the icon in the context of the buses is green or is red indicates whether that bus is currently moved or stopped. So if we were to have something like a suspicious package that was a credible threat, and it was existed on the corner of 7th Street and New York Ave Northwest, we could see in real time whether or not that particular suspicious package might be impacted by any buses or any trains that are immediately traveling along or underneath 7th Street at that time, and take appropriate protective action, coordinate with Metro Transit to stop those trains immediately and get them out of harm's way. So that's a couple, both traffic and transit context of the immediate environment around our location. Another important situational context is typically weather. And so this is another example of being able to add that additional situational context. What you're looking at here is a number of different things. We've been able to bring in a number of different feeds from the Esri Living Atlas, where there's a variety of free weather-related feeds that are coming from NOAA. So things like a live radar feed you can see here in the Memphis region, a lot of precipitation and a number of live lightning strikes. We can also see here on the right-hand side all of the weather watches and warnings that are impacting the current map extent of our map. So right now there's no weather watches and warnings in the DC area, but as I zoom out, I can start to see weather watches and warnings that are impacting the larger area. I also have embedded a widget from MeteoBlue, a meteorological website that has the 5-day forecast as well as hour-by-hour conditions to provide, again, additional environmental context. Now, one last piece of this dashboard that is relevant for security operations is to be able to understand not only the live use of this dashboard as far as incidents that are currently active that are being investigated, but we also want to be able to look at historical activity. So maybe we need to, during the event, we want to understand and go back and look at all of the incidents that happened over the course of the event, and we want to be able to review those and look at how they occurred over time. We can go back and we can see a complete log of those events as well.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. We get a lot of questions about how, from our clients, how do we acquire a historical global threat data source? And a lot of times in these examples, a lot of these are real, especially with social media or general media, these streaming feeds. A lot of time people just use those for the real time, and when the incident goes away, it goes away. What Chris has done here is using some of these different feeds. He has created a process to harvest that data and to establish a growing file by the minute, by the hour as new data comes in. So we can now go anywhere in the world and go backwards and identify, potential threats as reported by some of these different social media aggregators to any place in the world. If you have a VIP that's traveling to a foreign country and you want to understand, you're not going to be able to get a crime file easily, right? But you could at least get an understanding of what's been reported through some of these third-party data providers, which is a really, really interesting example. The other thing here, Chris, if you can just touch on, a lot of this data, the social media, the third party is at a cost. You have to contract with those folks to acquire that data. But can you, Chris, just kind of elaborate a little bit more on the Esri GOS ecosystem of available data and how open data sites, like you got this transit data from DC, or Highfield data from the DHS Highfield program, how agencies or organizations can go in and find free data that's populated by the GIS community.
Yeah, that really is kind of one of the most advantageous aspects of leveraging the ArcGIS platform for security operations is that while you may not, as the security unit who's responsible for protecting a particular event, have direct access to many of the various types of the contexts of potential threats, so much of that data is now available for you through the larger GIS community, through the open data capabilities that Esri makes available. So whether it was the live transit feeds or the traffic conditions, weather conditions, critical infrastructure, both Esri and organizations throughout the world are making various data sets available live using web services so that you can just take that data, you can discover data that's relevant to you, whether it's critical infrastructure or facilities, or whether it's traffic, weather, boundaries, buildings, parcels, and pull that data into your situational awareness picture. And that data is just live and is maintained by that source agency. So you don't have to worry about updating it because they're the ones who are updating it. You're just consuming a live service that represents the freshest version of that information. And so that's kind of a really unique thing that the larger Esri community and the ArcGIS ecosystem enables and provides an additional value on top of the actual software itself. This idea that you're collaborating with a larger community and there's a system of systems where everyone can consume all of these different publicly available web services to be able to enrich your operational picture.
Yeah, and then let me just reiterate, this example here, this facility is the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. These exact principles would work for anything similar to this. It could be the headquarters of an oil and gas company. It could be a refinery. It could be a pipeline. It could be a K through 12 or a university. It's really, really scalable to any kind of self-contained environment. And like I said, we had a micro view, but I also said, Chris, we can't ignore what's happening globally. And Chris is going to show you what we have called here the Esri Command Center dashboard that allows us to do that.
Sure. So when we were talking about how we can utilize Geo Event Server to consume these different real-time APIs from various social media analytic companies and then cross-reference them against various assets, we had that in our DC example, but where that becomes really powerful is when you have a global security operations center and you need to be able to monitor not just one, but hundreds of facilities or assets across the globe, and you need to understand potential threats to all of those at the same time and then take action on them. And so that's what you're seeing here is the use case that I just showed in the context of the convention center taken up to that global scale. So all of these different yellow icons on this map represent threats that are occurring within a 5-mile radius of a particular Esri physical asset. So if I click on this one that says ArcData Praha, politics, 8 new COVID-19 coronavirus cases confirmed in Czech Republic, and I select that, that's going to zoom into the Czech Republic. I can see that particular location, and I can see up here that this is our offices of our distributor of Esri in Prague. So this helps me context any potential threats that might be impacted to any of my assets across the globe, and then from my security operations center take action on them. So it really is it's a workflow that starts to become very powerful, regardless of whether you're looking at it from a individual facility or an individual event protection perspective, or all the way up to a global view where you need to be monitoring threats to a variety of assets in a much larger scale.
Great, thanks. And Chris, we have a couple minutes left. We mentioned the ability to do all this in 2D. I'm going to have Chris show you really quickly because we have about 4 questions that we're going to answer at the end. What does this look like? What is the future of 3D? And what does this ops planning and our response tools look like in a 3D environment?
Yeah, so as more and more municipalities start to incorporate 3D modeling into their workflows for maintenance of core municipal infrastructure, so things like keeping track of buildings and parcels and all of the work that a community is going to do to inventory what the built environment looks like, 3D models are increasingly becoming part of that work. And that's also going to mean that for security purposes, those models can be taken advantage of to improve situational awareness. So if you imagine kind of as you're thinking about site facilities, the ability to understand and optimize where to place cameras along a particular building to ensure that you have visibility around the perimeter of a particular location, or you want to be able to then wrap in even further any kinds of other live data feeds to contextualize. So, perhaps having a traffic camera where I can see not only the traffic camera image, but I can context what the environment around that particular location looks like. That's going to further enhance my ability to understand and react as quickly as possible when a threat to my particular event or facility occurs.
We have a couple questions here, and some of these are pretty simple to answer, and I'm just going to run through them. And then, Chris, I've got a couple that you're going to have to answer. One question came through is what products they wanted a list of product, or the individual asking the question wanted a list of products that we just showed, and I can walk through really quickly: Web App Builder, Operations Dashboard, Survey 123, Collector, Workforce Insights, and Geo Event. I don't think, Chris, did I miss anything there?
No, but really the key on that, Carl, is that all of these ArcGIS apps that we've been showing, whether it's the mobile apps or the dashboards, these web mapping applications, they all live off of one of 2 infrastructures, and that is ArcGIS Online, which is Esri's software as a service that lives in the public cloud, or ArcGIS Enterprise that lives as a server-based software solution on one of your physical servers inside of your network. So depending upon your security needs, you may find that ArcGIS Enterprise that's going to live on premises for you or in your own cloud environment could work, or if you're looking for software as a service solutions that have lightweight touch for infrastructure, ArcGIS Online is going to provide you those exact same sets of capabilities. So all of these different capabilities that you've seen start with either ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise, and all of those different apps, whether it's the mobile or the dashboard or the web mapping applications, are accessible in both of those 2 infrastructures, both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise.
All right, our next question is, are the widgets that we showed customizable using the ArcGIS JavaScript library?
So those widgets that you've seen come out of the box and are available. And yes, there is an ability using a Web App Builder Developer Edition to take those widgets and then further extend them if you so chose. That Developer Edition is going to be available to you on ArcGIS Enterprise so that you can build out your own custom widgets, and then you can extend widgets that we provide out of the box.
All right, thank you, Chris. And our time is about up. I'll remind everybody that there's a survey available to you through the webinar software, the GoToWebinar software. If you have additional questions, just please indicate on that survey what they are, or if you'd like to be contacted by us, we'll be happy to do so. And I'd like to thank you all for your participation today, and we will see you next time.